So for now, I think we're going to give it off to Laura.
you.
Who very kindly joined us today. So maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
a bit.
Thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. It's really lovely to be with you in person today. And the kind of format of our time together will be that I'll share a bit of my practice, a particular project that took place in the last 7 years. And then I wanted to explore a guided visualization with you, and a practice that I use that kind of starts me off on what I call a kind of material tracking dialogue with the invisible and the visible realms. And then I'll kind of suggest that as something that you can spend time with in the coming days and weeks as your module goes on. So, yeah, this project that I want to tell you about, it's a body of work that comes under the name Ceremony House, and it took place within the container of a PhD, but it really spilled out of that container, which is kind of inevitable and also, I think, necessary. So it's ongoing, like at its own pace, which is, yeah, the pace of the river that kind of initiated it. So yeah, in 2015, I was part of a group of artists who were exploring what happens when you kind of deliberately restrict certain epistemologies or ways of knowing that are dominant culturally, or that you might be really familiar with from your education, and kind of restricting those in certain ways and seeing what other information comes through. So practically speaking, this group of us, we were blindfolded and we were taken from Lancaster Station to somewhere. And then we spent a week camping and not really knowing where we were. I mean, we knew we were in the north of England somewhere. And over the course of that week, we were exploring with kind of very intentional embodied practices of what I think of as state changing practices. So like not with no substance or anything like that, but just forming like rituals that were intentionally asking the land what it had to show us. And over the course of that time, which was only a week, I experienced 3 visions, and I will talk a little bit about what I mean by that. And then spent the next 5 years going back to that place, because the visions were what I understood to be a kind of obligation to that place and to what was showing up in that place. So yeah, first I want to say something about the word visions, because I want to try and kind of demystify that word, because it sounds like I was standing in a field and like saw this whole thing play out. The actual core of my practice is about ushering in and finding ways of ushering in these like really ephemeral textures on the periphery of your consciousness. So it's not like some dramatic thing that might happen, or, you know, a clear, definable movie playing out in your inner mind or anything like that. But this kind of sense, like when you wake up from a dream and it's like, oh, there's, you know, you kind of catching the tail end of an image. And even if you don't have that image clearly in your mind's eye, your body has lived through it, your nervous system has lived through it, and you know it kind of 360, you know, you sort of know things about it and you don't know why you know things about it. But that kind of information is what I have oriented myself towards. So then all of my rituals are to find ways of saying like, I heard you. What else, you know, and kind of orienting towards that. And I believe that we're all experiencing these types of information every day. Like it's not a special thing. It's just about the orientation towards it. So yeah, that being said, the first vision happened at nighttime. The group of us had been walking for a long time in the night. We'd been exploring, leading one another with different, taking each other on a sound walk. So one person has their eyes closed, somebody's guiding kind of sounds and textures. And then we gathered in a field and just move my friend. Yeah, and then we intentionally sent our antennae into the ground and asked for a message from the land. So yeah, this combination of attention, intention, and setting a container where you're basically announcing yourself, saying, I'm here. And I suddenly felt myself to be part of a group of beings who were stones. They were stone and they were human. And we were standing in a huddle, and I very quickly felt terrified, and I saw on the horizon, the kind of silhouette of the horizon, I saw a group of beings who were rushing towards us. And I knew that they would reach us. And something about this being, the stone, this group of stone women, stone beings, I knew as this force came towards us that there wouldn't be anything that we could do about it. And they did. This force came towards us, and there was a severance of the stone and the human as a mutual entity. So this was the first vision. And I will put that in. So just registering if anything happens for you that they are here. This is the stone women. And the second vision that happened was on a different place in the area that we were working in. So the land was a kind of mixture of agricultural land and also the beginnings of moorland, so kind of protected area of national beauty or whatever. And a lot of the moorland is owned by really wealthy aristocratic estates. And so they rent out the land and they rent it to wealthy tourists to come and shoot pheasants, basically. So the second vision happened right next to this really huge kind of aristocratic estate. And part of the estate had dammed the river in that place. So the river was dammed to flood the land and create this kind of Victorian, colonial, picturesque lake. So just to say this, this part of the vision, which was like the severance, was right where the dam blocked the river. And in this image, that's okay. Oh, they're not moved.
Maybe the online libraries and things like this. Are they just very-
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's not the biggest problem.
Yeah, maybe stop share, reshare.
Hold on a minute.
Hmm. The actual presentation is that.
Should I do that one instead?
Sometimes actually.
Is it better? It's better? Desktop is better. Desktop.
See if it works.
Let's try and change though.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah.
You can see it on my end. It's the same.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you click.
Let's click.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant.
Yay. Okay.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, so this vision was of a of a group of beings that I knew to be the same group. Okay, again, like the kind of knowing that happens in not knowing. And this group were like skeletal. They were totally emaciated, totally worn down, and they were being forced to cut these stones into building material for this estate. There was no sound in this vision. There was no texture. It was like a flat, vibrationless place, basically. The last vision happened at dawn on one of the last days, and we spent about an hour before the sun came up doing a different everyone had a different gesture that had come out of their week rituals, and we repeated our gesture for an hour or so as the sun came up, and then as the sun came up, asked for future vision. And again, I saw the same group of beings. And this time they were carrying these river stones. They were carrying them very, very tenderly. They were carrying them up from the river, and they were carrying them onto the land. And it was through their voice, through their song and their sounding, they were navigating where to place these stones in the land, and they were building a ceremony house. So this was the future vision. So when I came back from this week, I started to research where I'd been, because up until this point, I still wasn't entirely sure where I was, and worked out that we had been just on the edge of this place in Lancashire called the Forest of Bowland. And when a place that doesn't look like a forest is called a forest in the UK, it basically means it was an ancient hunting ground for the monarchy. So land for the aristocracy to hunt. I also found out that we were right on the place where, between an area of villages in an area called Pendle and Lancaster, the city, and it was the area, and indeed the river itself, would have been crossed by a group of men and women who were accused in 1612 of witchcraft and then executed in Lancaster. And of course, also realizing that I was in the wider Lancashire region, these rivers, which, you know, this whole area is like boggy peatland. So it's really, really dense water logged land. And so a lot of the rivers start out in these hills and they run down obviously and become tributaries to the bigger rivers that make their way to the west coast and Morecambe Bay and Fleetwood. And these rivers, because the water is soft in this area, the water was very good for washing cars, and it also the transportation system of the rivers was huge in the industrial revolution period. So when the textile industry and all of the industrialization of that industry was booming, the river kind of becomes this, it's not just a place where violence has happened, but it's actually becomes like a medium of violence. So the river becomes mechanized in this way bigger colonial global story that stretches out to the Americas, to transatlantic slave trade, to the import of cheap calico from Calcutta. It's like this place is both local and the crux of a certain type of violence that was happening on this land, and it's connected to this global entanglement of other bigger violences. So all of that to say that that this is how I image what happened. I understand the second vision to be the story of the witch hunts at a kind of mythic level. That reality of that place where these beings were having to kind of destroy themselves because they had once been stone beings themselves, that kind of encapsulated the culmination of this moment historically, which, is as we know it, this period of time called the witch hunts, and that they were the same entity that I had felt underneath that layer. And that layer I kind of think of as the mythic deep time layer. And I want to image it like this for you because I'm working really with the vertical axis. So the horizontal axis is the speed of chronological time. Right, the chronological time happens, kind of can't be sped up or slowed down. So the chronological horizontal axis is like the speed of body, the speed of matter. I go so fast as my body can carry me, or bodies of machinery can carry me. And the vertical axis is the speed of light, which is to say the speed of miracles. So where they cross is where I'm interested in. And this is also the place of ceremony. Time, in ceremonial time, this is somehow the meeting of the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. And if that's like, if you have many questions about that or it's confusing, try to hear it like through your spine. So don't worry if you don't, if your mind is like saying what, just send it through your spine. So I understood myself to be kind of here, like somewhere between the second vision, which felt historical, and the future vision, and that my way of bringing about the future vision would have to be to access the stone women. So I had to find ways of coming into contact with this entity as a kind of act of repair that I felt somehow obliged to be part of in this land. So I did that for the next 5 years in lots of different ways. I kind of suggested some of them. I call embodied archaeology one of the ways. So I'm like working a lot with my body as the vessel that ushers things in. So I work a lot with the imaginal realm, so what I access at a place of imagination, which is just as real as anywhere else, and also at the kind of material consciousness of the body. So if you think of the different ways that your body, different elements in your body do different things, right? So they would therefore also think differently. It's like the bone marrow has a different job in your body than the blood. So their consciousness, their thinking is also very different. And the blood that pumps from your heart all the way around the rest of your body is very different from the blood that comes back to your heart. You feel like they have different textures, so they have different thoughts. And so I go into movement and different practices of accessing that, so that then I take that out into the world and see what comes towards me. So if I go out with the consciousness of bone, I see different things in the world. You know, I see different textures, different information will come towards me. And this is one of the ways that I'm encountering these lands, bless you. Imaginal journeys, yeah, I will explore that a bit in the exercise that I share. But I suppose the main thing I want to propose from this experience is that although it happened in this what looks like very remote place, for the next 5 years, like my way of communicating with that place both happened by visiting it in person many times, but also doing actions and gestures in my living room and in my neighborhood, and finding ways of speaking to this entity, this stone being entity, wherever I was. And that's what I kind of want to propose to you as a way of going through the next weeks of your practice. And that kind of relies on understanding the agency of the invisible realm, right? So kind of really taking seriously that your imaginal encounter and your experience of ephemeral presences can be amplified deliberately through this kind of conversation, which for me like takes a very material course of action. So for example, I will find a way to make an action as a way of communicating to an entity that I've experienced in my dream world or my imagination, or that's come through the land. And my action is a way of signaling to that entity that I've heard and received something. So it can be really practical. It might be like, I gather these objects in my living room and I place them in a certain way, and it's an acknowledgement to this entity, but I direct it to this entity as a way of saying, you know, this is what I've heard, this is what I've received, and then wait for the next invitation, if you like. And that involves this kind of material tracking. So you're kind of tracking each anchor, if you like, making these anchors as a very node. It's like a node of a vessel or a container that you can do. You might do one action in your living room. You might then want to visit a certain place that becomes apparent to you. You start to kind of build this constellation around you, around the area that you live or around your neighborhood. And it's kind of a way of stitching yourself into the world, but it's through weaving the immaterial and the material together. And those vessels, they might be one little action, but they might build into a whole architecture or a whole constellation, if you like. Got a bit sidetracked with time because we started late. Do you think we're fine? Okay, we're fine.
Please carry on.
Okay. Okay, there's one thing I wanted to say about this realm that I'm imagining as the deep time realm, the mythic realm. Actually, no, sorry. First thing I want to say, I tried to bring this work through in a PhD with people telling me like every week, like, what are you talking about? And so I had to develop a relationship with the part of me that was skeptical and the part of the external world that was extremely skeptical and saying, we can't see what you're talking about, so it doesn't exist. And I had to kind of go deep into my own lineage and think about what had happened there for me to be in relation to this skeptical voice within me and outside of me. And I just want to say, you know, if you respond to this kind of information with that voice being very loud and present, to kind of not rush yourself, or to be quite compassionate to the part that might think this is nonsense. And I say that because, you know, if the body experiences trauma, it forgets, right? It wants to forget, and it then experiences, puts in place for itself strategies to never encounter that scenario again. You know, this is how we survive. And collectively, we do the same. So if collectively and culturally, we've gone through hundreds of years of certain practices being so dangerous that you would be killed for them, then it's really, really, really makes sense that culturally we would forget those things. So if, like me, you grew up in a very secular household, you know, nobody talked about ancestors, nobody talked about spirit, nobody talked about rituals, nothing. It takes a lot of dialogue with that part of yourself to kind of start finding out what works for you. And yeah, my experience in academia was that if certain people were present to what I was trying to bring through, so if certain sort of, if you like, beings who embodied the skeptical witness were present to what practices I was then kind of showing in that space, a lot of time the information that I was used to coming through wouldn't come through. So I really want to take this seriously, that like the skeptical witness will not see, like it just simply doesn't create the vessel for emergent knowledges. And so, yeah, just to be aware that that entity within us and outside of us has an impact, and there are also creative ways to like work with that in itself. But yeah, it's very real. And yeah, just say one more thing about the mythic. I've written it here as like the mythic gives the mythic is potentially more abundant information wise than epistemologies of classification. So what I mean by that is that what comes through your imagination and your encounter with the land from an imaginal place will follow the ecological and material truth of the land, and that the truth of the land at the ethical level is that nothing can be excluded, whereas epistemologies of classification are kind of based on exclusion, saying this is this is not that, and they have very colonial reasons for those epistemologies kind of being more predominantly what we've been taught. So I just want to invite that there's a realm which you can think of as the mythic, or you might think of it as deep time. And I just invite you to explore what is emergent in that place for you, because it might reveal things that aren't the types of knowledge or the types of information that you might be used to. Yeah, I think actually that's all I want to say for now. And if we have time, this might be harder for the Zoom participants, but I wanted to guide you in a visualization. So my idea is that we do a guided visualization where you're welcome to close your eyes, be comfortable. Don't worry if you drop off. It's a really great place to experience things from. And then we'll invite you to just track through drawing or writing anything that you might have experienced. And then the invitation is to kind of start developing that in your own time, in your own ways. So you could go home today and practice a gesture. It can be super simple, of acknowledging whatever you experienced in the visualization. And for the visualization, I would also say it's like boredom is an event, nothingness is a thing. There's no way that you could do it wrong or do it right, or experience something or experience nothing. So you kind of want to get to this place where it's like whatever your experience is what you work with. So yeah, maybe I just set the stones out and everyone could take a moment just to get what you need, get comfortable. I'm going to drum a little bit, and hopefully it's not too warm that the drum went floppy. Maybe it did. And yeah, invite you to just be comfortable and close your eyes while I'm doing the guided visualization, and then I'll guide us out of it as well. But doing stuff that like
like them to go or.
guess they can stay that was a little bit compromised. So for people on Zoom, I'm going to guide a visualization and use some drumming. So just to say that the sound might be a bit difficult, but you're welcome to stay relax for the amount of time that we're doing the guided visualization.
There will be some drumming, so I would close it.